Some people give no Fs. We give plenty of Fs. 5 of them. Fabiano's fun fantasy football facts from the 2020 season. Here with me, SI fantasy analyst Michael Fabiano, with some fun facts. And Fabs, I love this list. You have 101 facts in your article from last season. It also applies a lot to next season, some learning moments here. So let's start off with some fun facts about quarterbacks.
And let's start off with Dak Prescott. And I know he missed most of the season. He suffered that gruesome leg injury against the Giants back in week 5. But before Dak Prescott got hurt, he was on pace for nearly 6,000 passing yards. He was on pace for over 38 total touchdowns and 434.1 fantasy points. Bill, that would have been the most points any quarterback has ever scored in a single season in the history of the National Football League. I know the injury was very gruesome, as I mentioned, but if you can get Dak in the 6th or 7th rounds in 2021, that might be like stealing. Now let's move on to New Orleans, where we're not sure who the quarterback's going to be right now. Is it going to be Jameis Winston? Might it be Matthew Stafford? Might it be Taysom Hill? Now, if it is Taysom Hill, that's going to be interesting. He was the starting quarterback for the Saints in 4 games this past year. During that time, he averaged 21 fantasy points per game. He was the QB7. He also rushed for 209 yards in that time. That projected over a full season would have given him 836 yards on the ground, which would have been behind Lamar Jackson, but ahead of Kyler Murray. And if you know anything about fantasy football, you know that we love rushing quarterbacks. So if Taysom Hill is the starter in New Orleans in 2021, Bill, he could be a top 10 quarterback easily.
Yeah, Taysom Hill certainly won people a few weeks if you were lucky enough to pick him up. Let's move over to wide receivers. Some fun facts about 2 playmaking wide receivers this year. Fabs, what do you got?
I'm going to go back to the Cowboys because they moved the needle, and I'm a Cowboys fan, and I think this is just interesting stuff. So CeeDee Lamb averaged 17.1 fantasy points per game in his first 5 games. Those were all started by Dak Prescott. Now, if you base a projected number on that total, he would have finished with 273.6 points. That would have been 0.6 points fewer than Justin Jefferson, who had one of the greatest rookie seasons of all time among wide receivers. Without Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb was the wide receiver 35, and he averaged 12 points per game. That's what Ben DiNucci and Andy Dalton will do to you. So if CeeDee Lamb can play with Dak Prescott for a full season, giddy up, folks. That could be a massive coup. And then let's talk about Tyler Lockett. He finished 8th in fantasy points among wide receivers. He had 265.4. Very good. He also produced the 2nd most points in a single game. He had a monster contest, 53 fantasy points against the Cardinals. But the 53 fantasy points he scored in that game made up 20% of his total for the entire season. In fact, 42% of his fantasy points came in 4 games. That was it. So while Tyler Lockett was a top 10 wide receiver, Bill, he wasn't what you would call reliable. Not even a little bit.
Yeah, he had that monster game against the Cardinals over, I think it was 15 catches, 200 yards. Incredible performance. And then he kind of trailed off toward the end of the year. Let's move over, though, to running backs. Don't tell me you have another Cowboy at the running back spot for a fun fact.
You know me so well, but this stuff is valuable for next year, and it's Zeke Elliott. Now, Zeke overall was a dud. He was a disappointment. But let's look at the numbers. He averaged 22.3 fantasy points and was the RB3 in the 5 games Dak Prescott started. If you project that total over a full season, it's 356.8, and Zeke is basically a top 3 running back. And then there's the bad. When you look at the numbers with Ben DiNucci and Gilbert Grape, or should I say Garrett Gilbert, no disrespect, and of course Andy Dalton, Zeke averaged 11.2 points per game, and he was the RB24. So he saw an 11 point per game difference from Dak Prescott and the rest of the curtain jerkers that the Cowboys had at the quarterback position. Dak Prescott's going to be healthy to start 2021, folks. So don't underestimate Zeke Elliott, who's only going to be 26 when next season starts. And then I'm going to talk about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I loved him coming into this season. And in the first 6 games, he was bananas good. He averaged over 21 touches a game. He averaged nearly 16 fantasy points per game. He was on pace for over 1,800 scrimmage yards. And then the Chiefs, what do? They signed Le'Veon Bell. And that was basically the Glide's disaster. He, in his last 7 games with Le'Veon Bell, he averaged 12.7 touches and 11.5 fantasy points per game. That's not good. But I think Edwards-Helaire proved that if he's given the chance to be a featured back in the Chiefs offense, he can be an RB1. The big question mark is, will they retain Le'Veon Bell? I would expect no. But will Damien Williams come back because he opted out due to the COVID-19 pandemic? That could hurt the Glide's value in 2021, folks. But even though overall he was a disappointment, don't think that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is not a good running back. He was on pace to be a top 12 back before the Chiefs signed Le'Veon Bell.
Now, these were just 6 of Fabiano's fun fantasy football facts. That means there's 95 more of them, 101 in total. Check out the article. Fab's great stuff as always. More fantasy football insight, including that 101 fun fantasy football facts, si.com/fantasy.